sing them songs about life and love and heartache and drinking and dancing and having a good time. You know, all these little things that have always been in my mind when I think of country.
For over 40 years, Alan Jackson fooled everyone. He stood on stage, sang his heart out, and smiled for the cameras. But behind the scenes, he was hiding something devastating. In 2011, doctors gave him news that he kept the secret for 10 years. Fans thought he was getting older. They had no idea he was fighting for his life. When he finally spoke the truth in 2021, it broke hearts across America. This is the real reason Alan Jackson walked away from music forever. Alan Jackson was born on October 17, 1958, in the small town of Newnan, Georgia. His parents, Ruth and Eugene, were working-class people trying to make the best of what they had. Ruth worked in school cafeterias, and Daddy Gene was a mechanic at a Ford plant. They didn't have much, but they had strong values: work hard, stay humble, and always keep music close. The house they lived in was built around Alan's grandfather's old tool shed. It was cramped, noisy, and barely big enough for a family of 7. Alan had 4 older sisters, Diane, Kathy, Carol, and Connie, so privacy was something he never really knew. But inside that little house was warmth, love, and the smell of Ruth's cooking. Growing up in that shed wasn't easy, but Alan found comfort in music. When he was 16, he got his first guitar for $50. It was a cheap guitar, but it meant the world to him. He practiced every day, learning chords and singing along with records by Hank Williams and Gene Watson. The next year, at 17, he stepped on stage for the first time in a high school production of Oklahoma. That moment, under the spotlight, lit a fire in him. Alan had been working since he was 12. His first job was at a shoe repair shop. After that, he took whatever work he could find, selling cars, building furniture, working as a carpenter. He even helped build houses. He dropped out of school not because he wanted to, but because the family needed money. And every job taught him something. Selling cars taught him how to talk to people. Carpentry taught him how to stay focused. Every hour of labor, every dollar earned, brought him a little closer to his dream. Eventually, Alan formed his first band. They called themselves Dixie Steel. They weren't famous. They didn't play stadiums. They played bars, VFW halls, and community events across Georgia. Some nights they made enough to pay for gas. Other nights, they barely broke even. But Alan kept going. His voice stood out, deep, honest, and strong. Slowly, people started to notice. Dixie Steel became a regular name in the local scene. It wasn't fame, but it was something. Alan also had something else that helped him through the hard times: Denise. They'd met in high school and fallen in love. On December 15, 1979, at just 21 years old, they got married. They didn't have money. Their wedding was simple, but their bond was strong. Denise believed in Alan's dream even when it felt impossible. She worked as a flight attendant to support them while Alan kept chasing music. Some days were tough. The bills stacked up. They had fights. They had doubts. But they stayed together. By the early 80s, Alan was still performing with Dixie Steel. The crowds were small. The pay was low, but he kept going. He had already lived the kind of life country songs were written about: hard work, love, struggle, and hope. In 1985, Alan Jackson and his wife Denise did something bold. They packed their entire life into a single U-Haul trailer and left Newnan, Georgia, heading straight for Nashville. They had no job waiting, no record label support, and barely any money. Alan had a handful of songs and a big dream. That was it. It was a massive risk, but they believed in each other. Denise, especially, never stopped believing in Alan's music. Their apartment in Nashville was small, and every bill felt like a mountain. Denise took extra flights as a stewardess just to keep them afloat. Alan picked up whatever jobs he could, but their big break didn't come from auditions or cold calls. It came from chance. One day, during a routine flight, Denise spotted Glenn Campbell on board. Most people would have been too shy to say anything, but Denise walked right up to him and told him about Alan. She didn't ask for a record deal, just a chance. Glenn didn't brush her off. Instead, he handed her his manager's business card. That moment changed everything. They used that single card as their reason to take the plunge and move to Nashville. No guarantees, just hope. Once they arrived, Alan found his first job working in the mailroom at the Nashville network. He sorted mail, delivered packages, and stayed out of the way. But he was always listening, always learning. That mailroom became his window into the country music industry. During his off time, Alan sat in on tapings of You Can Be a Star. It was a singing competition, and he studied every performer. He knew he belonged on that stage. In 1986, his chance came. He was just sitting in the audience, like usual, when someone asked if he wanted to perform. He stepped up and sang He Stopped Loving Her Today by George Jones. The crowd rose to their feet. Alan wasn't a nobody anymore. One of the producers there that night, Keith Stegall, was so impressed he started working with Alan, and that would become one of the most important partnerships of Alan's career. Before long, Alan signed his first songwriting deal with none other than Glenn Campbell's music publishing company. It wasn't flashy. He was writing songs for other singers and getting a small paycheck. But he was in. He spent hours every day writing, learning what worked and what didn't. Still, the road was rough. For years, Alan and Denise lived paycheck to paycheck. Every record label turned him down. Some said he didn't have the look. Others said he sounded too traditional. Denise held it together, working long hours while Alan poured everything into his songs. He watched his friends get signed, heard their music on the radio, and wondered if his time would ever come. In 1989, Alan Jackson made a move that changed everything. On June 26th, he became the very first artist signed to Arista Nashville, a new branch of the legendary Arista Records. At a time when country music was shifting, with new stars like Garth Brooks and Clint Black entering the scene, Jackson's name stood out. Arista Nashville's president, Tim DuBois, saw something special in him. Jackson had a raw, traditional sound that felt fresh but familiar. That signature, the first on the label's books, marked the beginning of something big. The photos from that moment still sit in Jackson's private collection today. But just months later, doubts began to rise. In September 1989, Jackson released his first single, Blue-Blooded Woman. It didn't go as planned. The song only reached number 45 on the Billboard Country chart. It failed to break the top 40. That kind of start raised questions. People wondered if Jackson's old-school style was already out of date. Even some at Arista were unsure if their first signing was a mistake. Still, Jackson didn't flinch. The lukewarm reception only pushed him harder. Years later, he would admit that the song's failure lit a fire in him. Blue-Blooded Woman might not have been a hit, but it introduced a voice that wasn't going away. Then came the real breakthrough. On January 15, 1990, Jackson released his second single, Here in the Real World. Everything changed. The song struck a chord with fans. It was about real life, its heartbreak, its grit, and its beauty. It reached number 3 on the Billboard Country chart and climbed all the way to number 1 in Canada. Jackson had found his audience. Suddenly, critics stopped doubting and started listening. Here in the Real World wasn't just a hit, it was a turning point. From that moment on, Jackson's career took off. It started a run that would see him land 27 straight singles in the top 10. That kind of consistency was almost unheard of. With one song, Jackson had proved that country music didn't need to chase trends. It just needed to be honest. His full debut album dropped on February 27, 1990, titled Here in the Real World. It did more than just ride on the success of the single. It stayed on the charts for over a year. 4 of its songs became top 5 hits: Here in the Real World, Wanted, Chasin' That Neon Rainbow, and I'd Love You All Over Again. That last one was especially personal. Jackson wrote it for his wife Denise to celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. It went to number 1 and became his first chart-topping hit. Impressively, Jackson wrote or co-wrote 9 of the album's 10 songs. For a debut artist, that level of involvement was rare. The album went on to sell over 2 million copies in the US and earned double platinum status. It was clear. Jackson's voice, his words, and his style had struck a deep chord. When Alan Jackson released Don't Rock the Jukebox on May 14, 1991, it shook the whole genre. The album rolled out 4 #1 singles in a row. First came the title track, then Someday, followed by Dallas, and finally, Love's Got a Hold on You. Each one hit the top like a perfectly thrown dart. But then came something even more haunting: Midnight in Montgomery. It didn't go #1, but it reached #3 and stayed in people's minds far longer than most chart toppers ever do. That song was more than just a tribute to Hank Williams. It felt like Hank's ghost was in the room. Jackson had visited Williams's grave in Montgomery, Alabama. That experience stuck with him. He recorded the song late at night, and somehow, you can feel that darkness and quiet in every note. The album itself was just over 31 minutes long. That's short, but it didn't matter. It was packed. George Jones even made a surprise appearance, singing the final line on Just Playin' Possum, a wink to his nickname. Critics loved it too. Entertainment Weekly gave it an A, which was nearly unheard of for a country album back then. By the time the dust settled, Alan Jackson wasn't just a rising star. He was already leading the neo-traditional country movement. 1 year later, on October 6, 1992, Jackson released A Lot About Livin' and A Little 'Bout Love. If the last album had rocked the jukebox, this one smashed it wide open. The song Chattahoochee became more than a hit. It became a full-blown American anthem. People didn't just like it, they lived it. The music video, Jackson water skiing in jeans, burned itself into the culture. It won the CMA Song and Single of the Year in 1994. The whole album was a beast. It sold over 6 million copies and became Jackson's biggest success ever. 5 singles went top 5. 2 went straight to #1, She's Got the Rhythm and I Got the Blues, and Chattahoochee. Jackson co-wrote 7 of the 10 tracks, even working with Randy Travis. And even the album title came from a lyric in Chattahoochee. That's how big the song was. Then came a moment that could have changed everything. In 1994, Alan Jackson walked away from 1010 Management, the very team that had helped him rise from nothing to superstardom. He didn't do it out of anger. He did it out of conviction. He wanted to keep control of his music, his message, and his image. He signed with Gary Overton instead. That one move shook Nashville. Most artists wouldn't dare change teams at the peak of their fame, but Jackson wasn't most artists. He didn't want to be molded by the machine. He wanted to keep things honest. The industry called it risky. Jackson called it necessary. That same year, on June 28th, he released Who I Am. And just like that, the gamble paid off. The album went #1 on the country charts and #5 on the Billboard 200. In its first week alone, it sold over 100,000 copies. It had 4 #1 singles: Summertime Blues, Gone Country, Livin' on Love, and I Don't Even Know Your Name. By January 1999, it had already gone 4X platinum. One version of the album even included a bonus remix of Chattahoochee for international fans. Jackson wasn't just a U.S. star anymore, he was going global. The critics gave it a B in Entertainment Weekly, praising the down-to-earth production and Jackson's calm, sure voice. The musicians listed in the album's liner notes read like a who's who of Nashville. But Jackson wasn't done proving himself. Later in 1994, he showed just how much range he had. He co-wrote Clay Walker's hit, If I Could Make a Living, with Keith Stegall and Roger Murrah. The song was catchy, short, and smart, just 2 minutes and 14 seconds long, but it went straight to #1. Jackson didn't even sing on it, but you could feel his hand in the lyrics. His writing was that sharp. In 1995, Alan Jackson hit a high point in his career. He released the Greatest Hits collection on October 24th, and it wasn't just a regular album. It was a big moment in country music. The album had all his biggest songs from his first 4 albums, and also included 2 new tracks, Tall, Tall Trees and I'll Try. Both of them went straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart. The album itself reached #5 on the Billboard 200 and #1 on the country chart. It went on to sell over 6 million copies in the U.S. alone and earned a 6AX Platinum certification. That same year, Alan Jackson took home 8 major awards. He even won the CMA Entertainer of the Year. It was a big deal because country music was going through changes. New sounds were coming in, but Jackson stuck to the old style, and fans loved him for it. Then, in 1999, he made a bold move. He teamed up with George Strait to release a song called Murder on Music Row. This wasn't just any song, it was a full-blown attack on how country music was changing. The lyrics said that someone had killed real country music. The steel guitar no longer cries, they sang. It was clear they were angry about pop influences taking over. And the title? It was inspired by a real murder back in 1989, when a man who worked for Cashbox magazine was killed on Music Row in Nashville. That crime was tied to a payola scandal. The song hit a nerve. Fans argued. Critics argued. Artists argued. Everyone was talking about it. And here's the wild part. It wasn't even an official single. But radio stations played it anyway. So many of them did that it reached #38 on the Billboard Hot Country chart. That made it the highest charting album cut that had never been released as a single in the broadcast data systems era. Only one other song had come close, Garth Brooks' Bellow Wood. But Jackson and Strait's message was louder. It showed just how many people missed traditional country music. In May 2000, Jackson and Strait opened the Academy of Country Music Awards with that same song. It was a gutsy move. Millions of people were watching live. They could have played it safe, but instead, they lit a fire under the entire country music world. The performance got major media coverage and became one of the most talked about moments in the award show's history. It wasn't just about the music, it was about making a statement. At the same time, Jackson was still releasing albums that fans couldn't get enough of. Everything I Love came out in 1996. Then came High Mileage in 1998. That album felt darker. Jackson later said it reflected some personal struggles. Still, it had 4 big hits. One of them, Right on the Money, hit #1. In 1999, he released Under the Influence, a tribute to the legends who shaped him. And in 2000, he released When Somebody Loves You, which brought him back to classic storytelling. Each album added something new while keeping his style alive. It was one of the strongest periods of his career. But behind all the success, things weren't perfect. In early 1998, Alan and his wife, Denise, separated. They had been married for 19 years. Fans thought their relationship was strong. But the truth was, fame had taken a toll. Alan's schedule was packed. The distance grew. Denise later revealed that Alan had been unfaithful. That was a turning point. Alan admitted he felt lost. He said, "We were just kids when we started out. We didn't get a chance to grow up before committing." The separation lasted several months. It was a painful time for both of them. Eventually, they found their way back. It didn't happen overnight. It took counseling, faith, and effort. Denise leaned on her Christian beliefs. That helped her forgive and heal. She even wrote a book about the experience. It was called It's All About Him: Finding the Love of My Life. The book became a New York Times bestseller. In it, Denise talked about the pressures of being married to a superstar, the pain of betrayal, and how she found herself again. Her honesty struck a chord with readers. Then came 9/11. The world changed, and something changed inside Alan too. On October 28, 2001, just 7 weeks after the attacks, he woke up at 4 a.m. with a melody in his head. Still half asleep, he recorded it into a handheld device so he wouldn't forget it. That song became Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning? He wrote it in just a few hours. It wasn't political. It didn't try to preach. It just asked questions everyone was asking at the time. At first, he didn't want to record it. He was afraid people might think he was using the tragedy for attention. But his wife Denise and producer Keith Stegall encouraged him to share it. On November 7, 2001, Alan Jackson performed the song live at the CMA Awards. He was supposed to sing Where I Come From, but changed plans at the last minute. He sat on a stool, backed by a full orchestra, and poured his heart out. The audience stood in silence, and then gave him a standing ovation. It was one of the most unforgettable performances in CMA history. Radio stations started playing the live version immediately. His website even crashed from all the traffic. The moment felt bigger than music. It felt like healing. When the song was released, it shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot Country Songs chart and stayed there for 5 weeks. It also reached #28 on the all-genre Billboard Hot 100. That was a rare thing for a country ballad. The song became part of his 2002 album Drive, which debuted at #1 on both the Billboard 200 and Top Country Albums chart. It sold over 201,000 copies in its first week. By May 2003, the album had gone 4x platinum. Jackson included both the live and radio versions of the song. It went on to win Song of the Year at both the ACM and CMA Awards, and it earned Jackson his first Grammy. Alan Jackson and his wife Denise raised 3 daughters who became the heart of his world. Maddie, the eldest, was born on June 19, 1990. She didn't just follow in her father's shadow. She created her own path. After marrying Samuel Seligman in 2017, tragedy struck. He died in a boating accident less than a year later. Somehow, she kept going. She launched the Nashville Foundation to help widows, orphans, and trafficking victims. Then, in 2023, she found love again and welcomed her first child in 2024. Ali came next, born on August 23, 1993. She married Sam Bradshaw in 2020 and made Alan a grandfather in December 2022 when she gave birth to Jackson Alvey Bradshaw. She often says her dad was every daughter's dream: humble, kind, steady. The youngest, Danny, was born on August 28, 1997. She keeps a lower profile, but her father's love for her is clear in his music. He even wrote, "You'll Always Be My Baby," for his daughter's weddings. Alan Jackson's family was always woven into his songs, but his success allowed him to build a life just as big outside the studio. In 2010, he sold his massive Franklin, Tennessee estate for $28 million. The 135-acre property, known as Sweetbriar, came with a private lake, 6 bedrooms, and a 19,000-square-foot mansion. It had become a local landmark, but Alan and Denise wanted something simpler. Even as his name topped charts, they chose peace over flash. That same year, on April 16, 2010, Alan was honored in a way few country singers ever are. He received the 2,405th star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He stood at 6801 Hollywood Boulevard, thinking back to a time when he was just a Georgia boy chasing songs. He had sold over 50 million albums by then, collected over 100 awards, and played for 3 U.S. presidents. But this moment, he said, felt like it was in a league of its own. A few months later, in January 2011, he shocked the industry by ending his 21-year partnership with Arista Nashville. He was their very first artist back in 1989. Together, they created 35 chart-topping hits and more than a dozen platinum records. But Alan was ready to take control. That same year, in March, he formed Alan's Country Records and struck a deal with Capitol EMI. He wasn't just changing labels, he was changing the rules. He kept creative control, while Capitol handled marketing. It was rare, it was bold, and it worked. Between 2012 and 2015, Alan released 4 new albums under his new partnership. 30 Miles West came first in 2012, debuting at #1 on the Billboard Country chart. In 2013, he dropped 2 more. Precious Memories Volume 2, filled with gospel songs, and the Bluegrass album, his first dive into that genre. Then, in 2015, he released Angels and Alcohol, which reminded fans he still had that old-school country soul. Each record showed a different side of him, and none of it felt forced. He was doing it all on his terms. But behind the scenes, Alan was carrying a secret. In 2011, the same year he left Arista, he was diagnosed with Charcot-Marie tooth disease, a genetic disorder that slowly attacks your nerves and muscles. It ran in his family. His dad had it. So did his grandmother and sister. But Alan kept it quiet. For 10 years, he kept playing shows, writing songs, and touring, even as the disease started affecting his balance and movement. He didn't want pity. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to keep going. In October 2017, the industry honored him again, this time with a place in the Country Music Hall of Fame. Loretta Lynn, recovering from a stroke, came in person to induct him. The moment was emotional. A year later, in 2018, he was inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame too. These weren't just awards. They were the final stamp of respect on a career that changed country music forever. Finally, in September 2021, he went public. On the Today Show, he told the world he had CMT. He said it wasn't life-threatening, but it was incurable. And it was getting worse. He didn't want fans to think he was drunk or sick during shows. He wanted the truth out there. He said he'd keep playing as long as he could, pointing to legends like Merle Haggard and Willie Nelson, who never really retired. In 2022, Alan Jackson made a decision that broke the hearts of millions. He announced his final tour, calling it Last Call, One More for the Road. Fans knew it wasn't just another string of concerts. It was goodbye. After more than 40 years in country music, Jackson was stepping away. But what truly stunned everyone was the reason. Alan revealed he had been diagnosed with Charcot-Marie tooth disease, a rare nerve disorder that slowly takes away muscle control and balance. He said it was getting harder to stand, harder to play guitar, and harder to perform. But instead of disappearing quietly, he gave his fans one last chance to sing along with him. The tour kicked off in June 2022 and quickly became a sellout in over 30 cities. Tickets vanished within hours. People drove across states just to see him one last time. For many, these weren't just concerts. They were emotional goodbyes to the voice they grew up with. While Alan was saying farewell on stage, something new was beginning at home. In December 2022, he became a grandfather. His daughter Allie had a baby boy named Jackson Alvey. Photos of Alan holding his first grandchild melted hearts across social media. Then, in June 2024, his daughter Maddie gave birth to another boy, Wesley Allen Smith. Alan, who had been open about his struggles with his illness, now found new joy in these little lives. He talked about how their laughter gave him strength, how telling them stories and playing music felt more important than ever. Even when his body was failing him, being a grandfather made him feel alive again. On May 17, 2025, it all came to an end. The final show of the tour happened in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, inside the packed Fiserv Forum. Over 17,000 fans were there, holding signs, wiping tears, and singing every word. Country music stars appeared on screen with video tributes. Jackson's family sent messages too. But the moment no one will forget was when he sang, "Remember When." As the last note faded, he stood alone in the spotlight and gave a farewell speech. His voice cracked as he called his journey a long, sweet ride. The crowd stood and clapped for nearly 10 minutes. The concert was streamed online and aired on national TV. Millions watched as one of country music's most beloved voices walked off the stage for the last time.